Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Reverend Dr. Roger Paul, and tonight we're going to study paper 187, The Last Day at the Camp.
178.
There we go, guys. 178, The Last Day at the Camp. And we'll be going through section 1, the Discourse on Sonship and Citizenship, and that is on page 1929 in the original book, or 178.11 in the other books. Also, I want to mention this is the second night of our 13-night study preparing for Easter. So we'll be online every night for the next 12 nights after this. All right, so let's say a little prayer and we'll get started for the night. Father, thank you for allowing us to come and study this wonderful revelation with these great people that come to our meetings. We thank you, and we hope you will open our hearts and minds tonight that we might learn something. This is difficult material we're going through, and coming up to the death of Jesus. And so be with us, support us, and help us remember it that we might share it with others, and that your will may be done in our lives. We thank you, and we give you the praise in your Son, Michael, Jesus of Nazareth. Amen.
Amen.
I think I actually got my clicker working tonight. How about that? Miracles never cease. Okay. Guess I'll start out tonight and we'll go from there. Paper 187, The Last Day at the Camp.
178.
I'm glad I got y'all to help me out there. Paper 178.
Nothing wrong with your brain tonight.
Last day at the camp.
Cut off his bill.
Well, at least y'all know I'm not perfect, right?
Yes, we know.
Not even close. Jesus planned to spend this Thursday, his last free day on earth, as a divine son incarnated in the flesh, with his apostles and a few loyal and devoted disciples. Soon after the breakfast hour on this beautiful morning, the Master led them to a secluded spot a short distance above their camp, and there taught them many new truths. Although Jesus delivered other discourses to the apostles during the early evening hours of this day, this talk of Thursday forenoon was his farewell address to the combined camp group of apostles and chosen disciples, both Jews and Gentiles. The 12 were all present save Judas. Peter and several of the apostles remarked about his absence, and some of them thought Jesus had sent him to the city to attend to some matter, probably to arrange the details of their forthcoming celebration of the Passover. Judas did not return to the camp until mid-afternoon, a short time before Jesus led the 12 into Jerusalem to partake of the Last Supper. All right, so this is really the last day that they were all together before the Last Supper. All right, Diane, would you take the next one?
Okay. 1. Discourse on Sonship and Citizenship. Jesus talked to about 50 of his trusted followers for almost 2 hours and answered a score of questions regarding the relation of the kingdom of heaven to the kingdoms of this world, concerning the relation of sonship with God to citizenship in earthly governments. This discourse, together with his answers to questions, may be summarized and restated in modern language as follows.
Okay, something I want to mention about this before we get started with this tonight is this whole section is what Jesus told them, but it's not in yellow. And the reason it's not in yellow is because this is the restatement by the midwares of the content of what they told him instead of the exact words. So all the way through this whole section, this is actually coming from Jesus, even though it's not in yellow. All right. Millie, would you take the next one, please?
The kingdoms of this world, being material, may often find it necessary to employ physical force in the execution of their laws and for the maintenance of order. In the kingdom of heaven, true believers will not resort to the employment of physical force. The kingdom of heaven, being a spiritual brotherhood of the spirit-born sons of God, may be promulgated only by the power of the Spirit. This distinction is produced of procedure, refers to the relation of the kingdom of believers to the kingdoms of secular government, and does not nullify the right of social groups of believers to maintain order in their ranks and administer discipline upon unruly and unworthy members.
So even though it's not right for us to use physical force as spiritual beings, as spiritual brothers and sisters,
Right.
we can assign people to take care of things that would require physical force, like a police force, right? And this is still within the rights of the Brotherhood of God. But personally, we should never use physical force in taking care of our laws. And it's going to be interesting when we get to the mansion worlds, how they maintain order in the mansion worlds, because we've got a lot of different types of barbaric people that will be on that first mansion world trying to learn new concepts, right? So, all right. Bill, would you take the next one, please?
Sure. There is nothing incompatible between sonship in the spiritual kingdom and citizenship in the secular or civil government. It is a believer's duty to render to Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and to God the things which are God's. There cannot be any disagreement between these two requirements, the one being material and the other spiritual, unless it should develop that a Caesar presumed to usurp the prerogative of God and demand that spiritual homage and supreme worship be rendered to him. In such a case, ye shall worship only God, while you seek to enlighten such misguided earthly rulers, and in this way lead them also to the recognition of the Father in heaven. You shall not render spiritual worship to earthly rulers, neither should you employ the physical forces of earthly government, whose rulers may sometime become believers, in the work of furthering the mission of the spiritual kingdom.
Now let's clarify that. In the mission of furthering the spiritual kingdom, we must not use force in doing that, right? Physical force.
Mm-hmm.
Physical force is only that area in which governments at times must take over to take care of certain situations, right? And that's the right of the government. We have rights as spiritual beings to give our opinion about such things, right? But we should not be involved, if at all possible, in the physical aspects of the material kingdom. Now, the other thing here is this. I want to point this out too. When rulers take the prerogative of God in their hands and require spiritual homage, doesn't that sound like what Caligastia did? He wanted everybody to worship him just like Lucifer, right? So the minute he did that, he lost his rulership of this world, if you think about it. Mm-hmm. And that's why the Melchizedek stepped in, right? So this is a perfect example of this. Even though he's a spiritual being, it was a physical government problem, right? All right. Okay. The sonship in the kingdom, from the standpoint of advancing civilization, should assist you in becoming the ideal citizens of the kingdoms of this world, since brotherhood and service are the cornerstones of the gospel of this kingdom. The love call of the spiritual kingdom should prove to be the effective destroyer of the hate urge of the unbelieving and war-minded citizens of the earthly kingdoms. But these material-minded sons in darkness will never know of your spiritual light of truth unless you draw very near them with that unselfish social service, which is the natural outgrowth of the bearings of the fruit of the Spirit in the life experience of each individual believer. And this is the key to us getting to light and life, right? When all men become spiritually centered and become more service oriented, then we won't need many of the laws we have, because it will be an automatic thing, because this will all be the fruits of the spirits, right? All right. Diane.
As mortal and material men, you are indeed citizens of the earthly kingdoms, and you should be good citizens, all the better for having become reborn spirit sons of the heavenly kingdom. As faith enlightened and spirit liberated sons of the kingdom of heaven, you face a double responsibility of duty to man and duty to God, while you voluntarily assume a third and sacred obligation, service to the brotherhood of God-knowing believers.
So this doesn't relieve us from service as citizens, service as citizens of a country or a city or the world, any of those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just because we're spiritual believers, we still have to have opinions on things, in which the way should be done right. Millie, would you take the next one?
You may not worship your temporal rulers, and you should not employ temporal power in the furtherance of the spiritual kingdom, but you should manifest the righteous ministry of loving service and believers and unbelievers alike, to believers and unbelievers alike. In the gospel of the kingdom, there resides the mighty spirit of truth, and presently I will pour out the same spirit upon all flesh. The fruits of the spirit, your sincere and loving service, are the mighty social lever to uplift the races of darkness, and this spirit of truth will become your power multiplying fulcrum.
Okay. One thing I wanted to mention here is it says here, you should not employ temporal power in the furtherance of the spiritual kingdom. What do you think the Catholic Church did in the Dark Ages? They went and conquered all the world, but they did it militarily, right? Do you think that this is what he was talking about here, that we shouldn't do? Okay. Spreading of the spiritual kingdom should not be done by wars and enslaving other societies, right? And I think that's very important. We understand that even as a spiritual brotherhood, even as the early Christian church, we made the mistake of doing just that, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting that here he tells of things we should not do.
Yeah, that's right.
Most of the time he's just telling you what to do.
That's right. Of course,
he rarely tells you what not to do.
That's true, but remember, this is the restatement by the midwayers too, right?
Yes.
So they're taking the concepts of Christ and trying to give their opinion of it, right? Sort of like what I do, you know? Could be right or wrong. Right? Okay, let's go on. Who's next?
Yeah.
Bill?
Okay. Display wisdom and exhibit sagacity in your dealings with unbelieving civil rulers. By discretion, show yourselves to be experts in ironing out minor disagreements and in adjusting trifling misunderstandings. In every possible way, and everything short of your spiritual allegiance to the rulers of the universe, seek to live peaceably with all men. Be you always as wise as serpents, but as harmless as doves.
It's hard to do that without getting your ego involved, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, human beings, that ego gets in the way all the time.
Well, and when somebody is being utterly stupid and trying to force their way, that's hard to fight.
That's right. It is. You should be made all the better citizens of the secular government as a result of becoming enlightened sons of the kingdom. So should the rulers of earthly governments become all the better rulers in civil affairs as a result of believing this gospel of the heavenly kingdom. The attitude of unselfish service of man and intelligent worship of God should make all kingdom believers better world citizens, while the attitude of honest citizenship and sincere devotion to one's temporal duty should help to make such a citizen more easily reached by the spirit call to sonship in the heavenly kingdom. Whew. Gives us pretty good advice, don't they? All right, here.
So long as the rulers of earthly government seek to exercise the authority of religious dictators, you who believe this gospel can expect only trouble, persecution, and even death. But the very light which you bear to the world, and even the very manner in which you will suffer and die for this gospel of the kingdom, will in themselves eventually enlighten the whole world and result in the gradual divorcement of politics and religion. The persistent preaching of this gospel of the kingdom will someday bring to all nations a new and unbelievable liberation, intellectual freedom, and religious liberty.
That's what we want, right? That's how we reach light in life.
Mm-hmm.
Millie, could you take the next one, please?
Under the soon coming persecutions by those who hate this gospel of joy and liberty, you will thrive and the kingdom will prosper. But you will stand in grave danger in subsequent times when most men will speak well of the kingdom believers, and many in high places nominally accept the gospel of the heavenly kingdom. Learn to be faithful to the kingdom even in times of peace and prosperity. Tempt not the angels in your supervision, angels of your supervision, to lead you in troublous ways, as in loving discipline designed to save your ease-drifting souls.
So even if you become comfortable, you can't become too comfortable, can you? All right.
I like that, ease-drifting.
Ease-drifting souls.
Ease-drifting souls.
I like to experience a little bit more of that myself. Okay. Bill, would you take the next one?
Sure. Remember that you are commissioned to preach this gospel of the kingdom. The supreme desire to do the Father's will, coupled with the supreme joy of the faith realization of sonship with God. And you must not allow anything to divert your devotion to this one duty. Let all mankind benefit from the overflow of your loving spiritual ministry, enlightening intellectual communion, and uplifting social service. But none of these humanitarian labors, or all of them, should be permitted to take the place of proclaiming the gospel. These mighty ministrations are the social byproduct of the still more mighty and sublime ministration and transformations wrought in the heart of the kingdom believer by the living Spirit of truth and by the personal realization that the faith of a spirit-born man confers the assurance of living fellowship with the eternal God.
So no matter how good things get, how comfortable we get in society and things like that, we can't forget our responsibility to teach the gospel, right? To preach the gospel of the kingdom. And I know just from the group we have here, y'all do that all the time. You know, I hear about it all the time. So we do this in our daily lives. But this is for everyone that wants to take on the job of helping enlightening the world. So this is for everybody, not just us. You know, I know we do it as a group, but everyone needs to do it individually on their own, you know.
Well, it's much easier after having read this book and studied it.
It is, yes. Puts the concepts in your mind anyway. Right.
Right. The thing about it is, you know, it's hard to find, though, somebody that is receptive to something easier and simpler than what they have been brought up to believe.
Well, you know, Millie, if you don't mind, would you reread that quote you was talking to us about when we first signed on. Bill wasn't with us, so he needs to hear this.
All great truths begin with blasphemies. That's attributed to George Bernard Shaw.
I thought that was great.
I told my friend that I gave the book to today, I said, a lot of people will call this book a blasphemy, not the fifth revelation. But
Galileo.
Yeah, we needed to get that on tape, Nellie.
Yeah.
Who's up, me?
I don't know.
Yeah. You must not seek to promulgate truth, nor to establish righteousness by the power of civil governments or by the enaction of secular laws. You may always labor to persuade men's mind, but you must never dare to compel them. You must not forget the great law of human fairness, which I have taught you in positive form. Whatsoever you would that man should do to you, do even so to them. So you have to let them make their own minds up, right? You can't compel them to make a decision. All right. Dear?
When a kingdom believer is called upon to serve the civil government, let him render such service as a temporal citizen of such a government. Albeit such a believer should display in his civil service all of the ordinary traits of citizenship, as these have been enhanced by the spiritual enlightenment of the ennobling association of the mind of mortal man with the indwelling spirit of the eternal God. If the unbeliever can qualify as a superior civil servant, you should seriously question whether the roots of truth in your heart have not died from the lack of the living waters of combined spiritual communion and social service. The consciousness of sonship with God should quicken the entire life service of every man, woman, and child who has become the possessor of such a mighty stimulus to all the inherent powers of a human personality.
So it's all of us, all of our responsibilities, right? To spread this truth. Okay. Millie, would you take the next one, please?
You are not to be passive mystics or colorless ascetics. You should not become dreamers and drifters, supinely trusting in a fictitious providence to provide you even the necessities of life. You are indeed to be gentle in your dealings with erring mortals, patient in your intercourse with ignorant men, and forbearing under the provocation, but you also must be vigilant in defense of righteousness, mighty in the promulgation of truth, and aggressive in the preaching of this gospel of the kingdom, even to the ends of the earth.
All right. That's a pretty good picture of it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Thought about Bill as I read, patient with your intercourse with ignorant men.
Yeah.
Patient.
Yeah. Takes a lot of patience sometimes.
I was with my Greek friend one day, standing on the corner waiting for the ladies to walk, and the preacher came over. One of our neighbors is a preacher, and he was going on and on about this and that and the other, and I'm just standing there with my mouth shut and smiling. And later, my friend, Honey, the Greek lady, she said, "Millie, you were so strong." She said, "I watched you. You had to hold your tongue." And I said, "It's okay. He's got his ideas, and I have mine, and maybe we'll come together one day."
Sometimes it's harder to hold your tongue than it is to preach, isn't it, Millie?
I couldn't say, "Preacher, you're wrong."
Yeah.
That's the way it is.
Bill, would you take the next one?
Sure. This gospel of the kingdom is a living truth. I have told you, it is like the leaven in the dough, like the grain of mustard seed. And now I declare that it is like the seed of the living being, which from generation to generation, while it remains the same living seed, unfailingly unfolds itself in new manifestations and grows acceptably in channels of new adaptation to the peculiar need and condition of each successive generation. The revelation I have made to you is a living revelation, and I desire that it shall bear appropriate fruits in each individual and in each generation, in accordance with the laws of spiritual growth, increase, and adaptive development. From generation to generation, this gospel must show increasing vitality and exhibit greater depth of spiritual power. It must not be permitted to become merely a sacred memory, a mere tradition about me and the time in which we now live.
And that's what we've tried to make it, isn't it? That's why this revelation is so important. This reminds me also of the parable about the talents, right? If you hide your talent underground and it makes no yield, it does no good for the kingdom, right? And this relates closely to this, that the fact that the gospel and the way we teach it and the way it transforms things multiplies and blooms into totally new and different things every generation, which if you think about it, it's a beautiful thing. It's like a growing plant or creature, right?
Mm-hmm.
And forget not, we have made no direct attack upon the persons or upon the authority of those who sit in Moses' seat. We only offer them the new light, which they have so vigorously rejected. We have assailed them only by the denunciation of their spiritual disloyalty to the very truths which they profess to teach and safeguard. We clash with these established leaders and recognize rulers only when they threw themselves directly in the way of the preaching of the gospel of the kingdom to the sons of men. And even now, is it not we who assail them, but they who seek our destruction? Do not forget that you are commissioned to go forth preaching only the good news. You are not to attack the old ways. You are skillfully to put the leaven of the new truth in the midst of the old beliefs. Let the Spirit of truth do his own work. Let controversy come only when they who despise the truth force it upon you. But when the willful unbeliever attacks you, do not hesitate to stand in vigorous defense of the truth which has saved and sanctified you. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that relates to us?
Yeah.
I think it perfectly relates to us, with this book and this revelation.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Tell you.
Throughout the vicissitudes of life, remember always to love one another. Do not strive with men, even with unbelievers. Show mercy even to those who despitefully abuse you. Show yourself to be loyal citizens, upright artisans,
Yeah.
praiseworthy neighbors, devoted kinsmen, understanding parents, and sincere believers in the brotherhood of the Father's kingdom. And my Spirit shall be upon you, now and even to the end of the world.
And it is, right? It's what the Spirit of truth does. All right. Millie.
When Jesus had concluded his teaching, it was almost 1 o'clock, and they immediately went back to the camp where David and his associates had lunch ready for them.
All right. Talk about a humble servant. David Zebedee was one of them. All right. Bill, would you take the next one, please?
Sure. 2. After the noontime meal. Not many of the master's hearers were able to take in even a part of his forenoon address. Of all who heard him, the Greeks comprehended most. Even the 11 apostles were bewildered by his allusions to future political kingdoms and to successive generations of kingdom believers. Jesus' most devoted followers could not reconcile the impending end of his earthly ministry with these references to an extended future of gospel activities. Some of these Jewish believers were beginning to sense that Earth's greatest tragedy was about to take place, but they could not reconcile such an impending disaster with either the master's cheerfully indifferent personal attitude or his forenoon discourse, wherein he repeatedly alluded to the future transactions of the heavenly kingdom, extending over vast stretches of time and embracing relations with many and successive temporal kingdoms on earth.
They really thought the world was coming to an end, didn't they? They really thought this was going to stop, that Jesus was going to bring down this new kingdom and the world would end as they knew it, right? And a new world would begin. So, so it was very hard for the apostles and the disciples all to understand this, all right? By noon of this day, all the apostles and disciples had learned about the hasty flight of Lazarus from Bethany. They began to sense the grim determination of the Jewish rulers to exterminate Jesus and his teachings. So they see Lazarus flee and they all get nervous, right?
Mm-hmm.
David Zebedee, through the work of his secret agents in Jerusalem, was fully advised concerning the progress of the plan to arrest and kill Jesus. He knew all about the part of Judas in this plot, but he never disclosed this knowledge to the other apostles, nor to any of the disciples. Shortly after lunch, he did lead Jesus aside, and making bold, asked him whether he knew, but he never got further with his question. The master, holding up his hand, stopped him, saying, "Yes, David, I know all about it, and I know that you know. But see to it that you tell no man. Only doubt not in your own heart that the will of God will prevail in the end."
So Jesus was quite aware of what was coming, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Millie.
The conversation with David was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger from Philadelphia, bringing word that Abner had heard of the plot to kill Jesus and asking if he should depart for Jerusalem. This runner hastened off for Philadelphia with this word for Abner: "Go on with your work. If I depart from you in the flesh, it is only that I may return in the spirit. I will not forsake you. I will be with you to the end."
All right. And we know that Jesus appeared to Abner in Philadelphia and his group shortly after the resurrection, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of his 19 appearances. All right. Bill.
Sure. About this time, Philip came to the master and asked, "Master, seeing that the time of the Passover draws near, where would you have us prepare to eat it?" And when Jesus heard Philip's question, he answered, "Go and bring Peter and John, and I will give you directions concerning the supper we will eat together this night. As for the Passover, that you will have to consider after we have first done this."
All right. When Judas heard the master speaking with Philip about these matters, he drew closer that he might overhear their conversation. But David Zebedee, who was standing near, stepped up and engaged Judas in conversation, while Philip and Peter and John went to one side to talk with the master. Because David knew that he didn't want Judas to be informed on what was about to happen, right, with the Last Supper. All right.
Said Jesus to the three, "Go immediately into Jerusalem, and as you enter the gate, you will meet a man bearing a water pitcher. He will speak to you, and then shall you follow him. When he leads you to a certain house, go in after him, and ask of the good man of that house, where is the guest chamber wherein the master is to eat supper with his apostles? And when you have thus inquired, this householder will show you a large upper room, all furnished and ready for us."
And we know that's John Mark's parents,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Said the master to the three, Whoops.
Sorry. Now you can read. We just read that, Billy. I wasn't fast enough.
When the apostles reached the city, they met the man with the water pitcher near the gate and followed on after him to the home of John Mark, where the lad's father met them and showed them the upper room in readiness for the evening meal.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Bill.
Sure. And all of this came to pass as the result of an understanding arrived at between the master and John Mark during the afternoon of the preceding day when they were alone in the hills. Jesus wanted to be sure he would have this one last meal undisturbed with his apostles, and believing if Judas knew beforehand of their place of meeting, he might arrange with his enemies to take him. He made this secret arrangement with John Mark. In this way, Judas did not learn of their place of meeting until later on when he arrived there in company with Jesus and the other apostles.
Very wise. Right.
Mm-hmm.
David Zebedee had much business to transact with Judas, so that he was easily prevented from following Peter, John, and Philip, and as he so much desired to do. When Judas gave David a certain sum of money for provisions, David said to Judas, "Judas, might it not be well under the circumstances to provide me with a little money in advance of my actual needs?" And after Judas had reflected for a moment, he answered, "Yes, David, I think it would be wise. In fact, in view of the disturbed conditions in Jerusalem, I think it would be best for me to turn over all the money to you. They plot against the master, and in case anything should happen to me, you would not be hampered." So Judas gave all the apostolic funds to David Zebedee. And it just goes to show you that Judas did not betray the master for the silver, did he?
Right.
All right. And I think that's important to know.
And so David received all the apostolic cash funds and receipts for all money on deposit. Not until the evening of the next day did the apostles learn of this transaction.
Really?
It was about 4:30 when the three apostles returned and informed Jesus that everything was in readiness for the supper. The master immediately prepared to lead his 12 apostles over the trail to the Bethany road and on to Jerusalem. This was the last journey he ever made with all 12 of them.
All right. And this is the picture of Jerusalem during that period of time. Y'all can look at that at your leisure. And I believe this is from the Vatican, if I'm not mistaken. All right. Bill.
Okay. 3. On the way to the supper. Seeking again to avoid the crowd passing through the Kidron Valley, back and forth between Gethsemane Park and Jerusalem, Jesus and the 12 walked over the western brow of Mount Olivet to meet the road leading from Bethany down to the city. As they drew near the place where Jesus had tarried the previous evening to discourse on the destruction of Jerusalem, they unconsciously paused while they stood and looked down in silence upon the city. As they were a little early, and since Jesus did not wish to pass through the city until after sunset, he said to his associates,
"Sit down and rest yourself while I talk with you about what must shortly come to pass. All these years have I lived with you as brethren, and I have taught you the truth concerning the kingdom of heaven, and have revealed to you the mysteries thereof. And my Father has indeed done many wonderful works in connection with my mission on earth. You have been witnesses of all this and partakers of the experience of being laborers together with God And you will bear me witness that I have for some time warned you that I must presently return to the work of the Father has given me to do. I have plainly told you that I must leave you in the world to carry on the work of the kingdom. It was for this purpose that I set you apart in the hills of Capernaum. The experience you have had with me, you must now make ready to share with others. As the Father sent me into this world, so am I about to send you forth to represent me and finish the work I have begun.
Mm-hmm.
Reminded them of their ordination, right? Okay, here.
Mm-hmm.
You look down on yonder city in sorrow, for you have heard my words telling of the end of Jerusalem. I have forewarned you lest you should perish in her destruction, and so delay the proclamation of the gospel of the kingdom. Likewise do I warn you to take heed, lest you needlessly expose yourselves to peril when they come to take the Son of Man. I must go, but you are to remain to witness to this gospel when I have gone, even as I directed that Lazarus flee from the wrath of man, that he might live to make known the glory of God. If it is the Father's will that I depart, nothing you may do can frustrate the divine plan. Take heed to yourselves lest they kill you also. Let your souls be valiant in defense of the gospel by spirit power, but be not misled into any foolish attempt to defend the Son of Man. I need no defense by the hand of man. The armies of heaven are even now near at hand, but I am determined to do the will of my Father in heaven, and therefore must we submit to that which is so soon to come upon us.
Doesn't mince words, does he?
It's pretty direct.
Yeah. Millie?
When you see this city destroyed, forget not that you have entered already upon the eternal life of endless service in the ever-advancing kingdom of heaven, even of the heaven of heavens. You should know that in my Father's universe and in mine are many abodes, and that there awaits the children of light the revelation of cities whose builder is God, and worlds whose habit of life is righteousness and joy in the truth. I have brought the kingdom of heaven to you here on earth, but I declare that all of you who by faith enter therein and remain therein by the living service of truth shall surely ascend to the worlds on high and sit with me in the spirit kingdom of our Father. But first must you gird yourselves and complete the work which you have begun with me. You must first pass through much tribulation and endure many sorrows, and these trials are even now upon us. And when you have finished your work on earth, you shall come to my joy, even as I have finished my Father's work on earth and am about to return to his embrace.
So he tells them plainly what's to come, right? And he tells them again about the heavenly mansions, right? All right. Bill.
When the master had spoken, he arose, and they all followed him down Olivet and into the city. None of the apostles, save 3, knew where they were going as they made their way along the narrow street in the approaching darkness. The crowd jostled them, but no one recognized them, nor knew that the Son of God was passing by on his way to the last mortal rendezvous with his chosen ambassadors of the kingdom. And neither did the apostles know that one of their own number had already entered into a conspiracy to betray the master into the hands of his enemies.
So as they went to the room, Judas had no idea where he was going, right? So that's the only reason they didn't take him during the Last Supper, right? John Mark had followed them all the way into the city, and after they had entered the gate, he hurried on by another street so that he was waiting to welcome them as to his Father's home when they arrived. And that's it for tonight. But this is a very short paper.
Mm-hmm.
Tomorrow night, we'll go through the Last Supper. Millie, would you like to close us in prayer tonight?
I will. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Heavenly Father, we are grateful for this opportunity together to study your word and the revelation and to experience by this book the tribulations of the apostles and the disciples and Jesus in his last hours. We thank you for this written word, this written account that we can experience by reading it, what he must have suffered. And we thank you for his time on earth, for trying to enlighten the people. We will take this book that you've given us and pass it to our friends and foes and try to enlighten them as you have instructed. Again, we thank you for our time together. We thank you for Roger and Diane. We thank you for the group that meets together once a week to keep us on track. We say these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. And thank you at home for joining us. Please come and see us.